Kick-hank. Dum dum. I've told you guys a million times back in another age of mine. I had a night job at the university. I would work 11 to 7 overnight, and I would take these weird cat naps all day. And I had to get up to go to work, get ready for work at 10 p.m. And that Law and Order, dum dum, was like my alarm clock, because my lady would always be watching that. I'd hear the dum dum, Jamar, get up. So I'm a little triggered by that kick-hank dum. Anywho, I'm sure I'll leave it at that. Guys, welcome back. Guys, we did it again. You're soaking in it. Welcome back to Wednesdays, 8 p.m. EST or EDT. I think something changed somewhere. It's EDT, no, not EST.
Yeah, the eclipse messed something up.
Eclipse. Total eclipses. This is Pencil to Pencil, a weekly creative live cast where you, yes, you, dear viewer, get to hang out with expert cartoonists, like real live Pinch Me and My Dreaming cartoonists. And we talk about the industry. We talk shop. Sometimes we have really, really exciting guests on. And I think you're in for a treat. Let me introduce myself, and then we'll go down the line. I am your first co-host. My name is JAMAR NICHOLAS. I am a cartoonist in good standing, and also on the board of the National Cartoonist Society, and also the Philadelphia chapter chair. Go Birds! I would be. Oh, hold on! I gotta do my plug. You guys, I'm also I also have a graphic novel series at Scholastic under the Graphics imprint. Leon the Extraordinary is in stores now. Pick it up, why don't you? The next book in the series, Leon Worst Friends Forever, will be in stores October 1st. Pre-order it now, why don't you? I would be remiss if I did not introduce my co-host. Get up, make the belt motion. We just had WrestleMania here in Philly. Make the motion. He is known in these streets as my back. Watch it. I know you have. He is the world heavyweight champion of webcomics. He is known as, by God, it's Stone Cold Steve Conley.
Hello, guys. I missed you. I missed you.
I missed you.
Yeah, every Wednesday. Wednesdays are lovely. It's my favorite day of the week. My name is Steve Conley. I write and draw the webcomic The Middle Age, which you can read at middleagecomic.com. It's over on Webtoons. It's on Tapas. It's on Go Comics. It just passed 19,000 subscribers on Webtoons. So, little engine that could. Nice. I also make TTRPG stuff. That's tabletop role-playing game stuff. For those in the know, the latest one is called Nibblemancy. That Kickstarter campaign is going to launch in the next few days. And I even sculpt some stuff like this guy, this little dude.
Hold on, put him back up. I'll give you the screen. Yo, that's insane.
Anyone can sculpt. Try it. Nomad Sculpt. It's on an iPad. You'll love it. Cartoonists will love it. Eat it up. But I would be remiss if I did not introduce the artist of the Phantom, the ghost who walks, the co-host who walks, Mr. Mike Manley.
Actually, I'm the co-host who sits.
That's fantastic.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, Mike.
And Steve is right. I draw the Phantom, and I also draw Judge Parker. And I have been told that I have drawn your childhood. Right. So those tears of either pain and anguish or joy are seeds that I planted long ago.
I love your intro, Mike. That's fantastic.
And I'm also a member of as is Steve, of the National Cartoonist Society, as is our guest. So it's like a four-square NCS meting tonight.
I love it.
It's like the Illuminati is lifting the curtain.
That little pyramid with the eye in it is just poking.
That's right.
That's fantastic. Hey, Mike, I was going to ask you about, speaking of drawing people's childhoods, what is the most interesting piece of ephemera that someone has asked you to sign at a show? Like, was it a Dark Hawk claw, or maybe?
Yes, here, Mr. Manley, I've fashioned my own claw launcher. I I don't think I've had anything. I haven't had to sign a boob or anything like that. I think that's more like a science fiction
Yeah.
thing.
They're
Like
boob
most
signers.
comic,
Yeah.
oh yeah, most
Mhm.
comic conventions, people are not getting their boobs signed.
Yo, I have a story. Do you want to hear my story real quick? I'm so animated. I don't mean to cut you off, but
Please.
I have a. So this is like Jamar year one, like Batman year one. You know what I mean? I'm learning how to use my superpowers. We're at SPX. It might have been year two, my second SPX, and some woman came down the aisle, and she was like very pregnant, and she was stopping at everyone's table and lifting up her not all the way up, but lifting up her shirt to reveal her stomach, and she was having people sign her stomach from the artist alley,
Wow.
right? So I'm looking down the thing like, yo, look at this. This is wild. So she gets to my table, right? So she's just like doing a line, and I pull out my Sharpie, and I'm like, hey, what's going on? And she puts her shirt down and goes, no, 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 thanks. I'm
Wow.
reserving space for some other.
Wow. I'm getting sorry. Stan Lee goes there.
So I said I was real salty after that. I said, "Wait, watch her come back next year with a baby who looks like Gorbachev. He's got all these like print marks all on his head."
Baby's got Zubatone on its face.
But yeah, guys, thanks so much. If you're new to Pencil to Pencil, this is a really fantastic live stream where we have a fantastic chat room where people are watching and commenting as we speak. Let's give a couple of rules of engagement before we bring in our guest. If you again are joining us for the first time, please ask us questions. Please state some comments, or try to add to our conversation. This is kind of like a fly on the wall style of interview show where we're just kind of chopping it up, talking shop as you were. I will not guarantee that I can get everybody's comments on screen, but if I feel it adds value to our conversation, I'll do my best. And before we bring Mike in, there was somebody, I promised somebody last week that I would answer their question this week because they showed up at the very last minute, like, whoa, I have a question. So our good buddy Francis, hey Francis, from YouTube says, and guys, we can answer this real quick. Just so I can keep my promise from last week, I like the promise. How do you feel about very young artists, like high schoolers, kind of copying a professional artist style to work on their own big comics and projects? So I guess maybe that's kind of copying as education. What do you guys think of that? Is that okay with you? Or emulating someone else's style to figure out your own?
I would go down to the word copy. Depends what they mean by that. If they mean, like if they've learned this is how you draw eyes. I used to draw faces just like Jack Kirby when I was a kid, and Jack Kirby always drew under the shadow under a lip as kind of this, almost like a little bit of electrical tape. And I drew that on faces. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what he was trying to say with it, but every face I drew had it, and I didn't know what that meant to represent. So if it's an artist influencing you, that's one thing. If it's copying, if it's tracing, if you copy a professional artist style to work on their own big comics and projects, if you're going to publish it, if you're, I really don't know where that's, copying someone's work, you'll get caught pretty quickly.
Yeah.
What do you guys think?
Mike, what do you think?
Well, everybody copies as a teenager or as a young artist. We all copy the artists that we like, right? I mean, that's part of your learning process is copying, And the thing is we always copy the stuff we like the most about that person's work, which of course always stands out because everybody goes, oh, I know that pose. I know where that came in. I know where that came from. Sure. Now, again, if you're a teenager and you're copying like I did, I copied stuff. If you're copying to learn, that's one thing. If you're, it's like no harm, no foul. You're doing your own webcomic. The thing is that when you're young, you're always obsessed with style. Everyone is obsessed with style. I want to have a
Mhm.
cool style. I want to, we all want to emulate. But so it's a stage. So there's copying and then there's influence,
Mm.
right? Like I have many influences, right?
Jamar Nicholas.
Right. And he was the first guy I copied. But like I used to copy Jack Kirby. In fact, the first time I went to Marvel, I had samples that were very much in the vein of the old Marvel stuff, which was not what they wanted at the time. They were that's when John Byrne was doing like the FF and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So my next round of work did not look as Kirby-esque, right? Even though I can sit down today and still do a mean Jack Kirby, and it's sort of ironic because within the period of, I started in 84 and in 96, so like 12 years later, I'm working with Bruce Timm and we're doing Jack Kirby.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big root influence for Bruce is Jack Kirby.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I worked on as a storyboard artist and then also as a background artist, and even also as a character designer on some of those shows, like a Batman Brave and the Bold, Kirby was sort of like a big root influence. So it's sort of funny because I actually did stuff that was very Kirby-esque, and that was okay. But when I started out, so styles come and go in fashion. The other person I was really into was Neil Adams.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is that it's one thing to be influenced by an artist, but there's certain artists that you can't really cop their styles because they're too idiosyncratic. And it's one thing to be influenced by that person. Like Barry Smith is influenced by Jack Kirby. So is Herb Trimpe. So is Bruce Timm. There's many, many people. And then when I was first buying comics in the 70s or New Marvels, Rich Buckler was doing the Fantastic Four, and he was totally doing Jack Kirby, and Joe Sinnott was inking it to make it. In fact, Sinnott inked the FF for decades that was actually to make it look like the FF. So it's something that you have to graduate from. It's nothing if you're 12, 13, 14, right? Everybody's doing their sort of manga style, whatever. But in order for you to really advance, you have to be able to not just walk in the shoes that somebody else has walked. It's kind of like what's happening with AI, because AI basically can only make art based off of what's already been done. So, you have a lot of people that might be influenced by, say, like Frazetta. So you go, oh, that's a Frazetta forearm, and that's a Frazetta leg, and that's, this is, if he didn't draw something from that angle, they might sort of struggle with that, that's sort of the, and then in strips, one artist may pass away, and then they've got the next person doing what they call a legacy strip, where you have people coming in and doing Blondie or Little Annie Fanny, or there's dozens of strips that the original creators are no longer doing it. But then your job is to mimic the style of the strip.
Got it.
That's my long, short answer.
I love it. Thanks, Francis, for bringing that up. And that's the kind of sweet content you get here on Pencil to Pencil. I'm very excited, but I'm also very excited to bring in our guest for the evening, Mike Cavallaro. Oh, look at that! Bling! It's very exciting. I would love, Mike, if you could kind of give us a tale of the tape for our guest tonight, and then we'll bring him in.
Well, he is a QB, an Eisner nominee, and it seems like he's had quite a diverse. He also teaches at SVA, so it seems like he has quite a diverse career, sort of similar to the three of us, because we're also doing many things. So I think artists like that are also good to interview because he's doing a lot of different things. He's in the kid lit land like you know, doing the graphic novel. So I thought he would be a great guest to bring on tonight.
Oh, I love it. All right, let's waste no more time, you guys. We're in for a treat. Hold on, let me get my stuff together. Mike, prepare for rendering.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Welcome to Pencil, Mike Cavallaro. Ding! fresh out the oven. How are you, Mike?
I'm good. How you guys?
All right.
You didn't need me at all. I was engrossed. You don't need me here.
Well, Mike, do you have a weigh in on that question that we just got? How do you feel about young artists copying style?
I think what you guys said. That's how we all learned. I would echo that. We all did it. I think it's a good way to learn. When I'm gonna be referencing music a lot. I wasted about 10 years in a punk rock band, and I mean that's how you learn your favorite songs. You learn how your favorite band put a song together, and how they put the instruments together to make that song happen, and then you go and you write your own music. It's the same thing, I think it's the same thing. I don't think there's anything bad about it. You can't publish it, and you're not swiping for professional work, but I think it supports and informs what you do later on as a pro.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Yeah.
I think it's always interesting when we have different kind of there's always a very interesting age bracket of guests we have. We have some old school guys, we have some younger guys, we have some people in between, or people.
I'm 105.
we just cut right to it. But just depending on who we're talking to, sometimes the origin story goes like, oh, you know what? I grew up and I love Jim Lee, and I used to draw all these Jim Lee things, or or there's a Neil Adams in there, or there's like, I love Scud the Disposable Assassin. You know what I mean? Or Love and Rockets. So, I think even for all the pros, there's always a starting point or something that you really admired that kind of got you onto the on-ramp of cartooning. Doesn't necessarily mean you draw like it anymore. And maybe I'll start with my first question is something that I get asked a lot is people always ask about your influences. Who are your cartooning influences? Who did you look up to? Who did you want to be like? And then usually when you tell them, they seem a little disappointed, right? And I think they seem disappointed because they're trying to find some sort of corollary between that and how you do things now. Like, oh, well, you don't draw like Ernie Bushmiller. I thought you said you like Nancy. I'm looking for the the very ugly children in your strips. You don't draw those. So, how does that connect with you? What were some of your earlier influences, and did any of them stick to where you are
now? Well, one thing before I throw out names, I think one thing that's important about influences, in the spirit of your question, is there's something about the nature of what we do, right? That sitting at the drawing board and drawing is almost a small fraction, smaller than it ought to be, of what we have to do. You know what I'm saying, right? There's all sorts of promotion, and I mean, there's all sorts of, it's a juggling act, right? Mm-hmm. And so, there's a lot of ways that an influence can influence, right? It's not just the style, right? Mm-hmm. So, I would say that a lot of my early influences, the ones who like those light bulb moments, there's the artists that you like, but there's those light bulb moments where it's more than just, I like that comic, right? There's something more there. And I think for any of us, it's like, to count as an influence, it's got to be someone that pushed you to this, right? That it's got to be that moment where you thought like, I want to do that, or I can do that, right? That so Scott McCloud was, when Scott McCloud was doing is, for the younger folks, before Scott McCloud was writing about comics, he was writing some awesome comics, and like Zot was hugely inspirational to me, especially those black and white issues. They were a genre, but they kind of defied the genre, and they looped in so many influences. There was an early manga influence before anyone was obviously influenced by manga, and like it would be him, it would be the Hernandez brothers, and it for all of those, it wasn't the style necessarily, it was the spirit of a guy with a pen can make a world, right? And someone might publish that, and as a kid, your fantasy is like that they're making a living, which isn't necessarily the case, but you don't find that out till later. But as a kid, you're like, wow, they're published, this guy's famous, right? But for me, the ones that resonated with me weren't just doing something well. It was they were showing me a doorway that I imagined I could go through. Like they were all these guys who were who were making their own thing in an independent way, and defying a lot of what seemed popular and what seemed to be happening in the mainstream. Like I loved a lot of those guys too. I'm a Kubert school student. I love Joe Kubert's work, etc. Alex Toth. I love that stuff. Neil Adams, of course. Jack Kirby's, of course. Right. But they didn't make me feel like I could step through that door. The ones who did that were guys like Scott McCloud and Jaime Hernandez and Gilbert Hernandez. And now I'm kind of blanking. I'm sure there was about a thousand more, but I mean, those are like major pointers to me, like go this way.
Like Cerebus, things like that. Were you into that?
Like that? I wasn't. I just didn't happen to be a Cerebus reader. I don't know why. I should have. I guess I should have been. I came to comics very late. Or later than I think a lot of people who end up being cartoonists. I think I was just a sci-fi and fantasy junkie. I got a lot of it from TV and film. Which again, for you younger folks, there was actually a lot of that in the 70s. We had a mix of like new stuff, but also rerun stuff from the 60s and earlier that I didn't know was rerun. It was all cool to me. I loved all that stuff. And I was a huge reader, so I was reading books and a lot of pulp, like fantasy, Conan, Edgar Rice Burroughs, whatever, handful of Star Wars books that were out. Like I obsessed about that stuff. What led me to comics was I ran out of that. At some point you'd watch Jason and the Argonauts about 100 times, and you read and reread Conan, and in my case, like I went to this friend of mine, this guy Mikey Vaughn, had a birthday party, and the birthday gift thing, the grab bag was a brown shopping bag filled with old comics, right? Wow. And I reached in and I pulled out a random issue of Cull, and I was a Robert E. Howard fanatic, but if you were a kid in the 70s, you knew that Cull had existed before Conan and that there were books and stories, but I don't believe any of them were in print. There was no way to get them. You had to be like a book collector with contacts. There's no internet. You know what I mean? Like, there's no way for a kid to go buy a Cull book and read it, right? So I remember pulling that thing out of the bag and the world just sort of like disappeared, and it all hit me like, oh my God, there's a comic. It comes out every month. I didn't care that it wasn't a Robert E. Howard story. It was Cull, right? And that's what led me to comics. I wanted more Conan. I wanted Tarzan comics. I wanted Cull comics. I wanted Star Wars comics. It was like everything I had seen on TV or in the theaters. I know most kids knew that those comics existed, but I didn't. And that's what sent me to a comic shop in the next town, was to get that. And then once you're in there, you start seeing all this other stuff. And by the time I got to high school, I was working in that shop. That was my first job.
That's great.
And that place was magic. It was this diehard support of independents, which were booming. It was 80s black and white independent boom, but it also had a back issue collection that went back to World War II.
Wow.
So it was an education. You know, I learned as much in that store as I did at the Cuba school later. Like
Wow.
I learned the history of this stuff because we had complete runs of things, and you could just look at anything, and the place was amazing. So it was my entire education. That's where I fell in love with it. You know,
What was the name of the shop?
It was called Quality Comics. It was run by this guy Alex Keene, and it was in Somerville, New Jersey. Yeah,
I take it it's no longer.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know, you described something that I think happened to a lot of us who grew up in that era, which was the happy accident. You know, because there was, like you said, there was no internet, there was nothing. TV pushed stuff at you, but finding comics was always like a random thing. Like, oh, you might find this issue of Superman, and then you might not find the next 4 issues of Superman.
Right.
You know, you would go to the supermarket and there would be comics, or the drugstore, but you never knew what was going to be in either one. Like I remember seeing like Creepy or Eerie in just one store would have that. None of the other stores had it. They all had Mad. So it was weird. It's like, you know, I would go shopping and you would get a Superman comic. But then the next time you went back, it's like, well, there's no Superman comics here this time. There's like Richie Rich or something, you know? It's like you never knew. And now it's so easy to find stuff because of the internet, and it's always pushing stuff at you.
Yeah. Mike, you know, to this day, because of that, I still really deeply enjoy buying a random issue of something that might catch my eye. I have no idea what's going on, and I so enjoy not knowing what's going on. Like, I love that. It's like a nostalgic experience of I'm just going to read this comic, right? And like, sometimes they still do that good job of like giving you just enough to tantalize you about what happened, right? Bring you up to speed so you can enjoy this story the way they used to. Some people still do that, not too many. But I love that, actually. I love being a little lost and then not picking up the next one, like just getting into something like that. I do it on purpose. I love it.
Well, that ties back into the adage about every floppy issue could be somebody's first, right? So just even as a storyteller, that you're making it accessible to people who just stumbled across it at the spinner rack.
Yep.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You know, guys, I'll be right back. Mike and Steve ask a question. I'll be right back.
Okay, so around what age was that you sort of, because that happens to a lot of people, like you have different interests, like art and music, and then it sounds like sort of like music pulled you for a while, and then art pulled you back. So I take it you, in your teenage years, you were interested in both.
Yeah. I had a guitar since I was in maybe grade school, and I was also always drawing. So there were two things I was doing since I was in kindergarten. I was, you know, I always had a guitar. I was always drawing. I never took the guitar very seriously for a long time. It was just, you know, kids learn an instrument when they're kids, and your parents want you to learn an instrument. So mine just happened to be guitar, right? It was always there. Like art was something that I was very interested in always, right? And you know, I think even books, you know, even books that are not illustrated, the kind of books that I gravitated to first, like they're very visual, especially, you know, the ones that I name dropped, you know, those pulpy books, they're very visual, right? So if you're someone who enjoys drawing, and I always did, and you're reading this stuff, like you want to get this imagery that's it's being painted in your mind as you're reading, right? You just want to get it out, you know? And so I was always drawing, And as high school, you know, I got into high school. I was about 14 when I got that job at the comic shop, and I started to realize, like, you're going to graduate high school, you need a job, you need a career. What are you going to do, right? You know, and I decided to go to the Joe Kubert School. I decided I was that was where, like, I liked telling stories. There were days where I thought, like, can I be a writer? Is that it? Can you do that? Can you be a writer? And then there were, you know, the next day I would think, I want to be an illustrator of some sort. I want to draw, and that's what comics did. The comics were the light bulb moment that told me I didn't have to choose. You know,
Right.
it was this thing that combined both of those and demanded that you did both, right? And that was it. I was infatuated with that idea when I was 15, 16, and you know, I'm a little older, and I still am. Like, I still love it, and I love that idea. So I you know, graduated high school, and my parents indulged this idea, and I went to the Joe Kubert School.
Oh wow! I was going to ask how encouraging your parents were between the careers of comics and being in a band, in a punk band. Like,
I was talking about this recently. This came up recently, and like my parents are immigrants. My parents got to the U.S. In the '60s from Italy, and my dad passed away a few years ago. Was a mechanic. My mom is still with us. She was a seamstress. It's my whole family is like a blue collar. That's my background. People who made things with their hands, did work with their hands mostly. I never saw this as being different than that. And I don't know why. It's not the immigrant story. Immigrants want their kids to. I mean, the cliche is the immigrants want their kids to, you know, assimilate and be doctors or something, right?
Yeah.
I don't know why they indulged me, except that I always perceived that my parents were very creative people. You know, you don't think of it. My dad used to restore classic cars. He was an auto body mechanic and did beautiful work. He was trophy winning, and car restorer, and he would resurrect things. Like, it was like sculpture. You know, my mom would make beautiful clothing from nothing. You know, it's the same job. You know, so I think that there was a really strong creative spirit there that just happened to be hampered by the need, you know, to exist in a country where you don't really speak the language well, and you're raising kids, and you need to keep a roof over their head, and you have more responsibility, right? And so, you know, they were creative people who had to feed their kids, right? So, I think that they encouraged me because they related to that desire to make things, right? That's the closest I can get, because it doesn't make sense that they did, but they were always incredibly supportive, even when they really didn't understand what a comic was, which they didn't really. They didn't really know what I was doing, you know.
Well, they are. I guess you would say, if you think about it in a way, it's craftsmanship. If your parents had craftsmanship, comics is craftsmanship. I mean, it's
Absolutely.
in service of telling stories, right? And you certainly get that at the Kubert School.
Absolutely. Yes, totally. You know, that's one of the things I like in retrospect, looking back at the school, was I'm really grateful for, you know, I had Tex Blaisdell, I had Erwin Hazen, I had Hy Eisman, I had Joe. You know, I had these teachers who really instilled more of a craftsman sort of aspect to it, and not, I don't know how to say it, not really like a sensitive artist thing. Not that that's bad, but you know, they were right in saying, like, you can't wait for inspiration. You need to draw this today. You know what I mean? And so that was their you know, their angle on making comics was, it's great when you have those moments of inspiration, but you can't wait for it, right? And so there was a worksman, you know, angle to to the way they, tried to teach us, and I'm grateful for that, because it's
Well, that whole generation who grew up from the Depression
exactly
definitely had that attitude. I was talking about this the other day. Like my grandparents went through the Depression. My grandfather was the kind of guy that every nail or screw that he pulled out of a board, he straightened it out. He put it in a little jar that said, 7/8, and stuck that on the wall in his garage. And I mean, that whole generation of people, it's like, yeah, you can't wait for inspiration. You gotta, I need to eat. My wife,
my dad was the same.
My kid needs to eat,
Yeah.
And so what age did you start at the Kubert School?
Well, I was right out of high school, so like 18.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you're in New Jersey, so it's not that far from.
Yep, I was lucky.
How did you hear about the school? Was it from the comics?
That's a good question. It must have been. I don't know how else. I actually don't remember. It had to be in the comics.
Yeah, because there was an ad. There used to be an ad in the comics. Yeah.
Yeah.
What was the admissions process like, Mike, if you can recall that? Like, were you kind of physically and mentally prepared to go to art school, especially in that era? Like, were you thinking about your
No, I was
presentation?
a jerk. I was a jerk. I'm not kidding. The admissions process, you filled out a form. The school, I don't know, the school made some sort of determination. They maybe weeded some people out at the form level. I'm not sure. I'm speculating. And I got invited in for an interview with Joe, which was terrifying. Joe was very nice, but I was terrified. You sat there and went through your portfolio with Joe Kubert. Harrowing experience. And I was accepted. I was accepted. That's all. That's what happened.
God looked at your portfolio and said, "Okay, kid."
I think they were looking for people I think they're trying to get a vibe to see, are you serious? Are you going to stick it out? Are you going to? I think that's what most schools, especially art schools, they're not just looking at the quality of your work. I think they're trying to gauge, like, can and will you complete the course? That's part of the assessment, right? And I fooled them, because I only did 2 of 3 years, and then I left and joined the punk rock band, and we got in a van and we drove around the country and played shows and went to Europe and made records and wasted our time. But I kept drawing through that whole thing, and I actually started working in comics while that was happening.
Wow.
You probably want to know how that happened. I'm gonna.
Yeah. How does that? So you're in Europe. You're in a van.
Yeah.
How do you?
Well, that we were playing mostly locally, so that wasn't an issue at the time. So when I started working, I dropped out. I was in this band. I was washing dishes. And I was desperately trying to get some work as a cartoonist or as an artist. I was, I envisioned myself as a, writer artist. I was going to do cool black and white comics and make tons of money, in the independent direct market.
Yeah.
And I was just getting rejected by everyone. It was very demoralizing. And, I would create samples, mail them out, get rejected, and just keep doing this, right? Meanwhile, a couple of the kids that I'd gone to the Kubert School with, some of them also dropped out, some of them completed the course, but within that year, a couple of them got hired at a comic book company in the city called Valiant Comics. And there was a lot happening there, and the company was growing, so they needed more people, and they did what you're supposed to do, students. They hooked their former classmates up with interviews, and a couple more people got hired. And my friend Maurice Fontenot, who does a lot of animation storyboard artist for many years now, Maurice just saw an opening and got me an interview. So I went up there with a bunch of stuff that I had continued making art after I left the school. I worked intensely, you know, in between dishwashing and rehearsals. Like I was always making new art. And I had an interview with Bob Layton. Bob, I fooled Bob too. He hired me. It's going to be a running theme tonight. Bob hired me as a colorist, which is the last thing I wanted to do. I actually used to say I'll never be a colorist, and of course that's what the universe did. It was that or wash dishes, and naturally I took the job, and obviously it was a great move. We were coloring by hand. You know, we were painting with Dr. Martin's dyes. It wasn't color coding; it was painting, and then they would shoot that board as original art.
On stats.
What's that?
Were they on stats? Coloring on stats? Like
no, we weren't coloring on stats. They had a really weird process. It was really a Xerox. We would Xerox the full size board. We would shoot it down, whatever that is, 67% or whatever the standard is, down to 1-ply Bristol because it would fit through the copy machine. And then we would take this twin tack. It was a double-sided sticker. And you would stick it down to the back of the Xerox, and then you would peel the other side off and stick that down to this like just lousy, thicker cardstock, just like real garbage, right? You didn't need a good surface. You just needed something to keep the board stiff while you painted on it. But the surface was basically that 1-ply Bristol surface. Well, it wasn't a bad surface to paint on if you were using Dr. Martin's dyes. It went down really well. And you know, to be honest, as someone who was, you know, I was just starting out, I was very nervous. I wanted, you know, this was my shot. I didn't want to blow it. There's something about coloring on a Xerox that alleviated a lot of like the stress that if it was almost anything else, you kind of stress you out. But if you screwed it up, you just threw it away and shot another board and, you know, mounted another board and continued. So that's actually, you know, it sounds ridiculous, but like when you're like scared, you know, you don't do your best work when you're afraid to move your hand, you know what I mean? So this really kind of made it kind of possible. And I did that for years. Don Perlin was my editor for most of that time. I worked with Barry Smith a lot. You know, Bob was a huge part of that bullpen. Incredibly fortunate to be part of what I think was the last New York bullpen. I mean, we had everything was happening there: penciling, inking, editing, lettering, coloring. We even had a deal with the separator where we would hand clean the film. So there was a little group of you know, production artists who would like hand clean the film, and like they saved money on that, and then that would go to the printer. So what an experience to watch all aspects of comics being made the first time out. And, you know, for me, I was coming into New York from Jersey. It was perfect. It's what you dream of. You want to get off the train. You want to go from the town you're trying to get out of and get on a train and go to New York and you come out in this other world, you know, and go to a bullpen and work alongside some of your heroes. You know, Ernie Colon was there. I loved Ernie Colon's stuff. Barry Smith was the artist I used to trace, going back to the top of our conversation, you know.
All goes around,
Ditko. I met, you know, Steve Ditko used to walk in and deliver his boards, and I did many issues with Steve Ditko. I mean, he would bring that stuff by in person. It was crazy. You know, it was a crazy experience.
Mike, Mike, I want to ask you a question, and I don't want to go too backwards, but I'm really interested in kind of like where you were developmentally when you left the Kubert School, because like kind of like when you came into the school and on your way out, like what kind of work were you doing? Did you find a new thing that you really kind of glommed onto at school? That,
you know, I'm just looked up and see we're 45 minutes into this, and I'm talking about my first coloring job.
No, this is what it's about, man.
Developmentally, I was nowhere. I really thought, I was like, why is nobody hiring me? You know, hire me already. You know, I was nowhere. I was nowhere. I had a great teacher who said, when I was still at the Kubert School, this is a 3-year course. Are you a 3-year student? I had no idea what he meant. I had no idea what he meant. And like years later, I was like, oh, yes, I'm not a 3-year student. So I was, full of, I was 20. I was full of ego, right?
Yeah.
And I couldn't understand why I wasn't getting the work I wanted or the opportunities that I wanted. And my drawing was okay. It was okay. I wasn't bad, but I certainly was not ready for prime time. I just didn't know it. And what happened was I did what most people do. I floated from job to, I left Valiant eventually. I floated from job to job in comics. I got some good gigs. I did some work at DC and a lot coloring type stuff, and still not what I really wanted. And blah blah blah. I strung together a living. And then what changed really was and I'm trying to keep it short, but I segued into animation at MTV Animation, which at that time had offices in New York. And what I found was that comics people at the time, this is still late 90s, at the time, that comics people are infatuated with anyone who comes out of animation. And animation people are infatuated with
Exactly.
anyone
We've talked about that
comics,
before.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it worked in my favor because, oh, you're a comics guy. And I was like, okay. And they had no problem with my drawing. So I started getting work there as a storyboard revision artist and then a storyboard artist. And I did that for a while. And I hit a point where I realized I'm doing like an average of 30 loose, rough panels of storyboards a day, every day. That's not a hard day, right? This is loose stuff, right? And I thought, like, if I could do 30 panels of this, I can do 6 decent panels, and that's a page. And if I can do a page a day, I can do comics. I kind of lost my confidence. I had my confidence had gotten beaten out of me from all the rejection. But so I kind of processed that. And there was a magazine at the time called Draw Magazine. I don't know if you guys have heard of this magazine, but I was an avid reader of this magazine. I can't remember who did it. And there was an article in there by I think it was Dave Gibbons wrote an article about his process, about how he mashed together a little bit of analog, traditional drawing, but he was making use of Illustrator and Photoshop, and this was still kind of early on. And I was like, this is what I need. I need, like, it's like having a studio when you can't have a studio. It's like having assistants. Photoshop is your assistant when you can't have an assistant, right? And reading that article around the time that I was hitting the stride of drawing, where I felt like my drawing's gotten, you draw 30 panels a day, your drawing gets better, and your confidence gets better. And then here was the missing piece, the path, the nuts and bolts to take that, right, and turn that into work, actual, pages, right? And I started working on a comic that I intended to self-publish. And
Great.
And that was like anyone's first self-published comic. It was nothing to write home about, but it really got me going. It started getting me drawing work, right? And
did you distribute it? Did you put it through the?
I did. I went through Diamond, believe it or not. They did carry it for a little while, and then they cut me off because they're like, "You're not selling anything."
What was it called?
It was called 66,000 Miles Per Hour. And it was about a high school kid whose entire town physically gets abducted by an alien. And it was this kind of like a town in a petri dish where they suddenly were stuck together and had to deal with each other. I think there were some good ideas in there, poor amateurishly executed. But it was a great learning experience, and I did several issues of that. And then some friends of mine invited me. They had started this webcomics collective called Activate, and they invited me to be a guest and serialize something. And I had this story that my dad had told me about his dad. That I was like, wow, that's an amazing story. And I thought, like, that'd be cool as a short comic. And I started serializing that. And I got about 10 pages in. I was doing 2 pages a week, and this editor named Kristen Simon at Shadowline Image, I guess, just saw it online and was like, "You want to publish this?" Which had never occurred to me. And I was like, "I guess," you know. You guys know Dean Haspiel? You must.
Yeah.
Okay, so Dean
everybody knows Dean.
Everybody knows Dean Haspiel. Dean was like, you know, one of the prime movers and shakers behind Activate, and this offer stunned me. And all respect to Image Shadowline and Jim Valentino and Kristen Simon, that offer came in, and I turned to Dean and I was like, "What do I do?" And he goes, "Well, don't go with the first offer you get." And he sent out an email. There he is.
It's like we summoned him.
Summoned him. How many times did I say his name? I think I only said it twice. It was very strategic there.
Shout out to Dean.
Dean sent it to a bunch of folks in the comics industry, like Gary Groth and Mark Siegel at First Second Books. And, you know, all their websites, go to their websites, they say, "Send us your samples. It'll take us 6 months to a year to respond." In 15 minutes, I was getting rejected. It was really amazing. But Mark Siegel at First Second was very interested, and we struck up a conversation. They ultimately did not want that story. That did get published by Image Comics. That was my Eisner nomination. The book was called Parade with Fireworks, and but it did create this conversation between me and Mark Siegel, which has led to this long career at career in quotes, I guess. At First Second, I've done a number of books, you know, at First Second with Mark, and you know, that's my latest series, and you know, that's kind of where I've stayed, you know.
The
but
color in that Image series seemed like it was watercolor or Doc Martin dye. Was it a lot of that same kind of the kind of confidence that came from all that Valiant work, or
it was digital? But I really did make it. Was I made it to look kind of lumpy and homemade, you know. Like I changed my style with every project. You know, I'm trying to visually represent the tone of each of those stories and what's different about the tone of each of those stories. And that one came to me, my dad just telling me the story in the backyard one night, you know, that he had never told me about my grandfather, and just kind of blew my mind, right? So I wanted a style that felt like, you know, lumpy and homemade, and, you know, because that's how the story kind of came to me, you know. So it did look kind of watercolory, yeah.
I find it interesting because, you know, you meet a lot of people who maybe they initially want to get into what used to be like the big two, right? And maybe you don't naturally have a swing that will fit in with what they do, but that doesn't mean that you can't do comics. And one of the things about animation, because it has so many moving parts, you're actually relieved of the responsibility of having to create a style, because when you go to work on a show, the style is already there. And so you can just concentrate in a way on the mechanics of creating things. Oh, and I wanted to ask you, what was it that you worked on at MTV? Because I worked at MTV for a while too. I used to commute from Philly to go up.
What? Huh. I did a very, very, very short stint on Daria.
Okay.
I was helping them make the Daria book. That was how I got into MTV. They needed someone who understood print because none of them had ever done that. And so my entry was that I supposedly understood how to make a book. So I helped them with this Daria companion book. And then once I was in there, I was like, I gotta stay in this place. I'm gonna take every test, whether I understand it or not. And I took a board revision test for Celebrity Deathmatch, and I got that job. So I was on Deathmatch the whole time. I came in at the end of the first season, and I was on Deathmatch the whole time.
Wow. Well, yeah, I worked on Spy Groove.
Spy Groove. Glenn
Hansen.
That's it. Glenn Hansen.
Yeah. So I worked on that, and I kind of put myself out of work because I was doing boards, but the way that they had done it was it wasn't like I give you a script, you go away, you do the boards. They'd had like these cheat boards, and then you would kind of work from those sort of cheat boards that Glenn or somebody else would do. So, but it was very interesting going up, and that's when animation was actually really expanding.
Yeah.
In the late 90s.
Well, I'll tell you something about that, Mike. I got in at Valiant during a 90s boom in comics.
Mm-hmm.
I got in at MTV during a boom in animation. And I got in at First Second during a boom during the graphic novel boom, and I've always said I get in when the door swings wide, that's when I get in, I think there's a trick to staying in, and each time I've managed to ride it out. But like those booms, those are great opportunities if you happen to be situated and you're in the right place at the right time,
Right. Well, I always, people will say luck, and I always say it's really preparation meeting opportunity. If the opportunity is there and you're prepared, you can take advantage of that opportunity. If you're not prepared, you will have opportunity, but you will either not notice it or you will fumble it. It's. I think you're a great example of that. You obviously were prepared, you had the skills, and then were able to take advantage of when the opportunity presented itself. Whether
a lot of luck,
so yeah. But I mean, you could get hired and fired the first day.
True.
It happens,
right?
Yeah.
And so I'm sort of interested in, because you sort of had like your trajectory changed because of those opportunities, right?
Yeah. I was always fighting this thing that was maybe instilled, by my upbringing and probably reinforced by my teachers at the school, of like doing the job in front of you, and you become this like sailor on the seas of fate, and it's fine, but you can meander a lot. You can wander a lot. Even you might be wandering from job to job, and they're good jobs, but you're wandering, and so it was little by little that I started to focus in on what I wanted and sort of try to push and drive, towards that. Once I was doing books with First Second, I was still just drawing other people's scripts, so it was another fight to get to the point where I could convince someone to pay me to write and draw my own stuff, which is where I started it's what sent me to the Kubert School, was this desire to follow in the footsteps of those creators that I admired, right, who were writing and drawing their own stuff. That's what I wanted, but it took me a long time to get there, in part because there's a seduction to some of these jobs. You're working it, it's fine, it pays well, and it gets renewed, and you 5 seasons on a show, it goes by in the blink of an eye, and you stick with it because it seems like you'd be a fool not to, right? But in the meantime, you're not doing your own work. I'll tell you a moment. I know we're running out of time, and
we got time.
What was important to me, like I had been working in MTV for a number of years. I was a storyboard artist. You know how fat an episode of something is. Storyboards. It's a phone book, right? So I had, in my apartment, I had this 3 towers in the corner of my room, of these just storyboards, like man-sized towers of storyboards, right? And literally, we went in to work one day. I get to the office, and someone goes, "Oh, there's a meeting over. There's kind of a common area. Like, everyone come over to here." And everyone on the floor congregates. It's a giant floor, right? Everyone congregates there, and they go, "If you're working on a show past this show number, go home. If you're working on one prior to this, go back to your desk. We'll talk to you in a minute." They shut the studio down. That was the end of the studio. That's how they ended the New York studio. They were just like, "Okay, go home," right? And you went home in shock. You were like, and I got home, and I remember walking into my apartment, and my eyes went straight to that tower. and I thought, you fool. I thought, like, you were supposed to be a comic book artist, right? And what if you had done a fraction of that? What if a fraction of that was yours?
Right.
Right? Because none of that's mine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can't do anything with it. It's a pile of paper. And that was the moment that I was like, I don't care what you do for money or what you do to keep a roof over your head, whatever, but no matter what it is, you will be drawing a comic book at all times, even if you're just going to push a staple through it, right? And sell it at Jim Hanley's for 25 cents. Do that, but make something, right? And
I think that was, I learned.
That was the point.
Yeah. You realize when you work in animation, which can be very rewarding, like you said, and very fun, but you don't own anything. It's a dead check. You get your check, and after you get your check, you get nothing else.
Right.
Yeah, unless you were to win an Emmy or something, you don't get anything else.
And even then,
you don't get a DVD. You don't get you don't get residuals. You don't get royalties.
No ham, no burger.
Your name goes by with a bunch of other people in like 1 second, half a second. And for some people who don't have you realize that there's some people that are happy to be the cog in the machine.
Yeah.
And they'll leave the MTV floor and go to the Titmouse floor or to New World Leaders floor or whatever. They'll just go from floor to floor because they don't really have any ambition to do their own thing, but they're happy and they work very well and they're very satisfied to be a cog in the machine. But, it's increasingly, as we see now, it's increasingly unstable for you to be in that position. I mean, that happened to me on Ren and Stimpy, right? Because they did the relaunch of Ren and Stimpy 2 years ago. I was just realizing that because I got a email.
Was that 2 years ago already?
2 years ago. Right, and it was saying that my buddy Bill Ray and a bunch of the original Ren and Stimpy guys were coming back. So I did a tryout to do backgrounds. They hired me. I had to do a 30-day probation, and then you were on. And then one Friday, the same thing. They had a meeting. Hey guys, love ya. But today's the last day. No reflection upon you, right? And I just got an email back in February where they were going to say they were going to, we're going to be premiering it finally, because I thought it was dead.
Oh.
And then now it seems like that date has come and gone, and there's like no mention of it on their site or anything. So yeah, it's just a very weird. I feel like I was in the golden time in animation because it was booming. All the way from like 96 to 2010 when I stopped, it was just, I could find all the work that I wanted. I worked on really awesome stuff. But you're right. I mean, I have all those boards and background designs and everything in my attic, but it's,
Yeah.
Mike,
yeah, it really solidified for me that you got to be making your own stuff, and I think that's where we're at. I think it's for cartoonists. I tell my colleagues and my pals, most of my friends are all cartoonists, and I just say the same thing. I just say ownership. That's where we're at. We're at this point where everything is everything. A comic is a movie, is streaming, is a book series, and there's really no limit to what can happen with something that you make, and these other mediums they're hungry for content, so it really puts us in the driver's seat to make an investment in yourself, find a way to make an investment in yourself. That's what this stuff is. Whatever you got to do for work, do it. But, I was talking to someone over the weekend who says they're having a hard time finding time to work. And I was just like, a panel a day is a page a week, and a page a week in 6 months, that's a proposal. In a year, that's a mini project. You know what I mean?
Right.
Um,
Right.
do a panel a day, you know, but it's an investment in yourself, you know, because that's really where we're going. Uh, it's it's not like, personally, it's not anywhere that I don't want to be working on someone else's anything. And as I've gotten older, saying no is my favorite. That's my favorite. You know, my yardstick has become like, I get it if a job offer comes in and I say, can another person do this um as good? Like, if I say no, will this still get made by someone else, maybe better? And if the answer to that is like, yeah, then I don't take the job. You know, my position is making the things that won't get made if I don't make them. That's what I'm here for, right? And it's not always an easy road. You know, it's not always an easy road.
No, no. So what was the first? So you started out being a hired artist to work on other people's stories for a second. So what was the first thing that you pitched to them? Because at a certain point, you obviously said, "Well, I have a relationship with these people. They know me. They know my work. They know I'm professional." What was the first thing that you and how did you go about that?
I started doing the traditional pitch as I was advised, which was a bunch of written back matter, you know, synopses, character profiles, character sketches, around 20 pages of lettered thumbnails. That's the traditional graphic novel proposal. I started by doing that, and I have a bone to pick with that because I'm a proponent. I live and breathe in the book market. That's where I thrive. You know, I'm a huge supporter of the book market, and I love my publisher and everything. But the flip side of the book market is you have this world that comes from right. It's built for writers, right? And so it wants us to be writers. You know, wants us to propose things as if we're authors, not cartoonists, right? I felt my ideas dying on the page in prose, and I had to learn that was happening. I didn't know that was happening. I had to learn that was happening, and then I started to like kind of buck the system because I was like, for a field that really wants to celebrate voices, you're kind of taking mine away. Like, I'm not a writer, I'm a cartoonist, right? If I could write, I would stop drawing. Are you kidding me? Steve's laughing. He knows, right? I'm not a writer. I'm a cartoonist. I communicate this way for a reason, right? Because I can't communicate any other way. I don't know another way to deliver a story, right? So turning me into a writer, making me write this proposal where it drops dead, in type, that's not fair, right? And so I got a million things rejected. And finally, I got to this point where I had this idea and I wanted to pitch it. And I just went like, well, let's just go down the list. Like, I'm going to do all this work. I'm going to make this thing. I'm going to pitch it. Everyone will reject it. I'm going to be stuck with this stack of useless paper and lettered thumbnails. So let's not do that. I'm just going to make a 24-page comic and I'm going to hand it to you. And if you can't see that this is something you want, I don't want to work with you. Right. So I just made a 24-page comic, and I did write a little outline of like what would happen in the actual story. And I handed that to Mark Siegel, and I waited for the rejection. And 2 or 3 weeks later, he texted me. He said, I'm in the acquisitions meeting right now. It's going really well. And then like a couple minutes went by and he's like, they're making an offer. And I was like, what's happening? And that was Nico Bravo. That was the first Nico Bravo book. And then that turned into 3 books. And then we took one of the supporting characters and kind of spun that off into her own series. That's the new book, EOWULF. And I'm currently working on the next EOWULF book. I'm kind of like maybe 3/4 of the way through that. And it just kind of broke through this ceiling that I hadn't been able to get to. And like, it really gave me some confidence. And I've been learning to write I'm learning as I go. Mark is an amazing editor. I wish we had time here I could talk a little bit about Mark as an editor and how he's helped this. I don't.
Well, why don't you give an example of
I'll give you an example of Mark Siegel's editing style, and I gave him this. So I give him this outline, right? It's 1 page. That's the outline for the first Nico Bravo book, and then I get back to him and I'm like, well, what'd you think? And he goes, I love it. Got to change the ending, but other than that, I think it's great. And I'm like, I got what? The ending is what's with the ending, right? My stomach drops, right? I don't know what he's talking about. What's wrong with the ending, right? And he goes, you know what I mean? We got a contract with the reader, and that was it. And I went home like mystified, like what? What? What do I do, right? And so it was because of that's it. That's all he said. You got to change the ending. We have a contract with the reader. That was it. Pulling on that thread, the ending revolves around the supporting character. That if he hadn't said that, that supporting character was this very unlikable, intentionally unlikable antagonist who meets with a terrible end at the end of the story, right? And because he said that character kind of slowly morphed into a girl. It was a boy, turned into a girl. I started thinking about their motivation and their behavior throughout the story. They became a much more sympathetic character. That old ending didn't mean anything anymore, right? The ending changed as a result because the character changed, right? And it changed the entire core of the book, that comment.
Wow.
That character is EOWULF. That is the main character in the current series who would not have existed without that one sentence. Mark never said anything else for the next 3 books. That's
wow.
his editing style is like a bonsai tree. It's like, and that's it.
That's awesome.
He's amazing. He's amazing.
So I find that's an interesting, because I've known Jamar for probably like 25 years, so I've seen him go through his whole development of Leon and everything. But the idea that you have to also be willing to commit to doing that much work on spec that might get rejected. I think that that's something that a lot of young cartoonists are maybe not, they don't want to accept that because, in the beginning of your career doing 25 pages of something, that's a lot of work, right? I mean,
what if you got 5 ideas?
Yeah.
Right? What if you got a couple book ideas that you're going to spread out at the same time? It's 100 pages on spec, right? 20 pages each idea, right? It's a ton of work. It infuriated me, it doesn't seem fair to me. Right. But what counterbalanced that to me was knowing, I had Erwin Hazen as a teacher, Erwin Hazen, was the man behind Dondi, right? Classic newspaper strip. And the tendency for young people, which I was once, and other people, is to think that the thing started when you entered the room, right? And that's not the case, right? I do it too, right? But so you immediately feel like I am being taken advantage of here, right? But as you start to go back through comics history, do some reading, or if you can find one of them, ask an original syndicated cartoonist what they had to do to get that strip, right? That was a lot of spec work, and it's not roughs. This is finished, weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks of finished dailies and perhaps Sunday artwork, finished, right, on spec. So like we've always been here, right? This isn't new. This isn't new to the book market. It's not new to Scholastic or For a Second or any of these. I mean, like cartoonists have always been in the position of having to fight for their ideas and do an awful lot of work to make their ideas a reality. But I'll tell you what, it's worth it. You know, it's worth doing a lot of work for yourself than it is to me. It's more worth it than it is to not do that and go to work making someone else's dreams come true. Right. Like I said, I'm not here for that anymore. You know.
Mike, I have a question for you about the book market and how smooth of a transition has that been for you going into kid lit and also traditional book publishing from comics? You know, beyond just having basically the keys to your own castle there, but there's a lot of work, like you said, like editorial, also just all of a sudden having this team of people around you that are talking about marketing and publicity and all that other kind of stuff.
In some ways, for me specifically, it wasn't a leap because I was never a good fit in the direct market. I didn't belong in the direct market. There was just nowhere else for me. The book market didn't exist in 1991. You know, there was none. There were no graphic novels, right? So I was never a good fit there. And I think there were a lot of us who were reading comics and maybe involved in the comics industry in some way at that time. But we knew that comics could be something else. We were seeing it in other countries. We were seeing it in other places. And we knew we might not be able to describe what it looked like and what it was exactly, but we kind of knew that this was not the limit of what it could be, you know, what we had at the time, right? So in a sense, I was working in an animation studio in Manhattan, and I took a lunch break and I went to the St. Mark's Comics on St. Mark's in Manhattan. And there on the ground was this wave of books by a publisher I'd never heard of. And they were beautiful books. And I bought every one of them. And I took them home and I told my girlfriend, I'm going to work for these people. And about a week or two later, I walked into my producer's office at Curious Pictures and I quit.
Wow.
And she said, what did I do? Was it me? She goes, is it me? I go, no. I'm done. And 3 months later, I was working on my first, those were First Second's first books. And 3 months later, I was working for them.
Wow.
Right. So what I'm trying to say is some of us never belonged in the direct market. And when I saw those books, I knew this is what I've been waiting for. This is what I've been waiting for, you know, and it's an easy fit, you know. I belonged there. It just didn't exist yet, you know. And I think that's true about many of us. You know, we had to wait for it. You know, I would say comics at that time, it's like the carnival game where, you know, that game where you're shooting water into this
into the clown's
right?
mouth.
It raises up, right?
Yeah.
I at that time, that was comics. That was especially the book market, the graphic novel market, because it was you're one person and you got to raise all those things up, right? Because we want to make these books, but we have to make an audience, right? To read the books so that we can make the books for the audience, right? You can't make a book that there's no one to support it, right? So we have to cultivate the audience, but we've got to make the book too, and we've got to find the people to make it. And it was this crazy juggling act for the first couple years to sort of create this thing, right? And we really made up, I think, for a lot of lost time, you know, here in the States. I mean, like in a lot of ways, we've really caught up, and we have an amazing body of work. I mean, it's a golden age, you know. We have the best of his, you know, we have guys like Dean Mullaney with the American Library of Comics, right, doing those beautiful you know, reissues, reproductions of newspaper strips. We have translated comics coming in from all over the world. We're making Pulitzer Prize winning comics here in the United States. I mean, like, this is the golden age, you know. You can literally have a chance of making a comic about almost anything right now and finding a home for it, right? And it can thrive, you know, depending on, you know, the vagaries of fate and stuff like that. But you didn't have a chance. There was no chance in 1992. There was no chance.
Not even. Hey, Mike, just going back to that memory, our good buddy Mimi asked, what were those first second books that caught your eye on the floor?
Okay. Well, Robot Dreams, which is now turned into an Academy Award nominated animated film, which everyone should see. That was by Sarah Varon. Journey into Mohawk Country by George O'Connor. A book called Klezmer, which was meant to be part of a series that it just didn't do well. That was the book that broke my heart and made me quit that job. That book, Klezmer, out of print. You can find it. It's by Johan Svar, who's a massive figure in European comics. And he has these collaborators like Louis Trondheim. That group changed everything about how I approach comics. That group, you know, huge influence on me. Svar, Trondheim. There might have been a Trondheim book in that group. There were definitely more. It's a long time ago, but those jump out at me. There were more of those. George O'Connor's now he did the Olympian series for First Second, which is the stories of the Greek gods, and now he's doing at the Asgardian pantheon right now. It's amazing books.
Very cool. Thanks, man. Yeah, so we're kind of running out of runway. I say this every week. Where does the time go? But Mike, I hope you'll indulge us in what I like to call ka-chow, the lightning round. It's
okay.
question palooza time.
All right.
Dear Steve Conley, would you like to ask Mike some of these star questions?
Yeah, we got some questions here. It looks like we have Seamus Biale, might be the all-star.
I know
here.
Seamus.
Was there? Let me see if I get this. Was there any animated movies or TV shows that you liked or were inspired with as a kid?
All of them. Yes. I mean, oh my God. You know, I'm currently rewatching Batman animated. I mean, that was great. You know, too much. You know, Star Blazers. Oh my God, Super Friends. You know, everything. Thundar the Barbarian. I liked everything. Bugs Bunny.
You can't go wrong with that.
There was a follow-up. Were you a fan of Godzilla?
Godzilla, yes, of course. 4:30 movie, Godzilla week.
Right. Yeah.
4:30 movie.
Right.
The Godzilla.
I woke Mike up.
I think everyone in the Northeast had the 4:30 movie, and
yeah.
We had it in Detroit too.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And then one week it would be like Johnny Sacco, and then one week it would be like Gamera.
Yeah, like the Thanksgiving holiday was all like the Thanksgiving week was like all monster movies.
Yeah.
Love that. Danny Fry on YouTube asks, did animation prepare you for drawing for a younger audience?
Yeah, I mean, you would think it did, but I don't think it. Animation prepared me to draw, you know, and it prepared me to be versatile and loose, and it reminded me to have fun. You know, that's what drawing storyboards, loose storyboards, reminded me to do. But you know, I don't do anything for a younger audience. I don't think about it. I'm not writing for kids. I'm not drawing for kids. I'm trying to have a good time. I am like 15, you know, in my brain, I'm a 15-year-old, and I'm trying to make myself laugh. You know, I never think about, oh, this is for kids, do this or do that. Like, it's not what I'm doing. You know, I'm just trying to have fun and make myself laugh. That's really it.
That's fantastic. And Seamus will give, he also mentions, want to give you a shout out for helping with John Leguizamo's Ghetto Clown.
You're welcome.
And then we got Scott Kurtz, Table Titans and PvP fame on YouTube. Did your editor ever explain the quote contract with the reader unquote comment and what he meant by it?
No. He left me like that.
Did you follow up and ask, and he just kind of
No, I was afraid to ask him any more questions after that. I just wanted him to leave me alone. You know, I mean, it turned that book into like it became such he didn't need to tell me more. You know, it turned into such a better book, and it gave me the character that is my current main character, my current series, who didn't exist and wouldn't have if he hadn't said that. I mean, it's wild.
Well, thinking about the new book, is can people jump in with EOWULF, the first
Yeah.
book, or should they go back? Okay,
Well, they should go back.
they should go back.
They should definitely go back. But I did write it as if you hadn't read the previous books. There's some strategic recap. You can totally jump in on EOWULF, absolutely, and hopefully it inspires you to go back and read the Nico Bravo books.
Mike, I also have a question about being, well, obviously the pendulum with graphic novels is swinging so far to another direction that there's also asks on your time as author illustrator, right? So are you kind of in the mix with promoting your next book? Are you doing conferences and school visits and all that stuff? And how do you kind of fit that into your year?
I would like to do more than I do. You know, I'm on my own with that. I know some people have like, booking agents who get them into places and get them at conferences, and I don't have that. Like, things kind of come my way. I'm speaking in Brooklyn at a place called Center for Fiction on Friday to a bunch of kids. I don't think it's open to the public. It's a bunch of kids that they're going to bring in, and I love doing school visits. I mean, I love that audience. The audience is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
They'll ask anything. They have no filter, and I think the wonderful thing about middle grade readers is they like it or they don't. They don't bring baggage to it. They like it or they don't. I love that. But yeah, I do the talks and the interviews and this and and stuff. Not a ton. Not a ton.
What would your basic advice be beyond draw for yourself that you would give to the budding graphic novelist? Because it seems like you said, I think too, that is sort of the future, is everybody sort of being an independent, creating your own stuff. So what would like, if you were going to go back in time, would you give that advice to yourself? What advice would you be giving?
Well, I wish I had started doing that sooner. It doesn't get easier to get off the treadmill of, it sounds like I'm complaining about paying work, but it really locks you up. You're locked down meeting your deadlines, and you've got an idea in the back of your head that you want to develop, and you can't get to it, right? And that doesn't go away, right? It gets harder as you get older because you get more responsibilities as you get older, and it's hard to put those aside, right? So I wish I had started focusing on my own stuff. If I'm honest with myself, I wish I had a neat and tidy answer for this, Mike. I don't think I do, because if I'm honest with myself, I desired what I have now, but I wasn't ready to do it. I didn't know it. There's so many things had to develop. So many of my own skills had to develop in order to get me here. I don't think I can change anything about my path. As I look back, including jobs that I didn't like, I learned something on every one of those that makes what I do today possible. It makes my work possible, even jobs that I wanted to quit. You can't see it at the time. So, my advice would be to have a goal, have a target, and pursue, definitely pursue things with an eye on your own work, but don't close yourself off to opportunities as they arrive, because they may seem like sidetracks, but we don't always see it until later. They may actually be key. They may be key components to helping you achieve the other thing. It's all indelibly linked, and
Yeah.
to change any part of it just alters it all. So I wish I had an answer for that, but
Well, no, I think that's very good. I think that's a very good answer. I think that that's a very honest answer, because I don't think everyone can be like that. Can have that kind of honest. And if you can say, well, I don't regret my first 20 years, that's pretty cool, man. Rather than being,
I don't get here without that.
Yeah.
I don't get here without that. It's all pieces,
So what is your typical work day, or I guess since it's stretched out, but you still got to be able to get the train out of the station and to the destination, right? When you're working long form, right?
Yeah. You're asking what my work day is like?
Yeah, like how do you work out your schedule, since it's up to you, right? You don't have, for seconds,
no, it isn't.
Going too many pages.
No, I mean, I've got deadlines. There's a structure to it. The company is trying to plan fall and winter waves of books, and they've factored you in, whether they've announced it or not, and they have a game plan that they're hoping you will help out with by meeting your deadlines. So my day starts. I have a very calm morning. I have coffee with my girlfriend Lisa. I watch an episode of Batman, the animated series, as I have coffee every morning. And then the rest of the day is panic. The rest of the day is me just trying to do 2 pages. I'm trying to do 2 pages a day. And for me, that is, I work on the iPad. I work in Clip Studio. I do everything in Clip Studio. I love working on the iPad. And that's kind of become my whole thing. And I just try to do 2 pages on that, and hopefully have a little time to wind down in the evening. Doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
School, I teach. That takes a chunk out of your time. There's other things going on that takes a chunk out of your time. So it's a balancing act, and life doesn't always cooperate with your deadlines. So it helps to have a plan and a schedule, and a calendar. You brought Dave Sim up before, and when I never read Cerebus, but when I was trying to gear myself up to self-publish, I did read that Cerebus Guide to Self-Publishing.
Oh yeah, it's a classic tome. Yeah,
it's classic. I recommend it to everyone if you can get it. There was one part in there that I retained, and it was, he said, we have a tool that answers this question about whether you're going to do your self-published project or your self-starter project, right? This is not a guessing game. We have a tool. It's called a calendar. And he said, make a schedule. Doesn't matter what it is. It can be a page a week. No one cares what it is, but make a schedule and give it a few weeks, and then look and see, did you stick to that? If you didn't, stop talking about this project that you're never going to do. Your friends are tired of hearing about it, right? And if you did, you're on your way, right? And that hit me like a atom bomb when I read that. It stuck with me, and it is how you approach this project. Break out a calendar, divide the days by the number of pages, and do that. Give yourself weekends off or a day off to do laundry and decompress. Give yourself some time to be a human being, or you'll break.
Yeah.
And otherwise, it feels like you're moving through cement, but a page or 2 a day, it doesn't feel fast enough, but it adds up and you get done. That's all.
Do you do it in Clip Studio because you can work faster?
I think since reading that article way back in Draw Magazine, I think the thing I was always looking for a way to bring it all under one roof, which of course didn't exist at the time, or not to my satisfaction.
Right.
And when Clip Studio came out, I thought, oh, maybe it's this. And it still wasn't, because there's things about Clip Studio, especially when it was Manga Studio, that weren't good enough, right? It's getting better and better and better. You can do almost everything in it now, right? So I was always looking for a way to bring it under one roof. And then my girlfriend is a circus artist, And she did go through a few years where she was just following work around the country. And I decided I needed to be mobile, right? And so the iPad was the solution to that. It's the ultimate mobile thing, and I loved it. And even when we came back to New York, like I had days, and you guys will appreciate this. I had days where the weather would be nice, and I'd go to Bryant Park, and I'd get on the public Wi-Fi and put on a ball game in the little corner there, and sit there in the park and draw 2 pages. Be done by 5 or 6 o'clock. Every so often you look up and you're like, I'm in Bryant Park, And I mean, for any of us, all of us, I know you guys too I know all of you missed weddings, parties, birthdays, right? Vacations. You missed this stuff because we were all chained to our boards on a deadline at some point or some time. We missed all the best weather, right? You got to be at your desk. You're looking out the window at the best days. You got a day off. It's raining, So the iPad just sort of released me from that, You can draw anywhere. I love it. I think it's great.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah. When I was in the hospital, I was drawing my strip on my iPad. It wasn't as easy because of the way of like importing things and getting things.
That's a little clunky.
Yeah,
it's a little weird.
Yeah,
I've gotten used to it. It's a giant phone. I mean, it's weird.
Yeah. I'm just sort of really interested in that because it seems like there's people that are sort of early adopters of new technology, and then there's other people that are like, I'm never going to ever adopt any technology. Some people love drawing on paper, working for the original. So it's sort of interesting because you had guys like Joe who probably never drew on a tablet.
I doubt it.
And there's
the guy was not human. Like he would go straight. He would take a lettering pen and go straight to Bristol board with no pencils and start in the top corner like a desktop printer, and then draw a masterpiece in front of you, make you want to jump out the window. I mean, it's not a human being. So what does he need a tablet for? No mistake.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's really interesting, and we're still at the beginning of it if you think, because like Clip Studio hasn't been around that long. None of these, Photoshop's been around a long time, but it's like every year they incorporate more assets, so you can incorporate like all these pre-rendered guns and things like that. Because I know, like for something like the Phantom, right? There's a lot of reference in the Phantom, so it's fantasy, but it's like realistic. So I have to draw a real gun. So if you're drawing real M16s or rocket launchers or Jeeps or whatever, that's just a lot of like man hours of doing that. So when you can bring in these other assets, I know a lot of artists do that now.
When you work on it, are you working in Clip or are you working in some other program
Well, I started out doing it on board, and then for a while I went to penciling it and then inking it in Clip, because I can ink very fast in Clip. And now, since I started back on the strip after my health break, I'm doing it all in Clip. And, you sort of weigh, there's that part of me that loves the original, that loves a brush on paper, that loves a Hunt 108 on a really great piece of paper, right? There's a certain way I can make a line that in Clip Studio, I have to craft the line. It doesn't happen automatically, right? So different pen points give you different, like you were saying, Joe used that B6 or whatever, that globe point, right? That gives you a certain line, right? That you can try to mimic in Clip. It's not exactly, but then the strip is reduced down so small, then you go like, well, then does it really matter, right?
Right.
Part of my heart breaks because I love the original, But
sure,
you have to also. I think if I was going to do a graphic novel, that would be something that I would have to really consider whether I would do it all digital. I did a webtoon. I did it all digital. So I don't, it's just like, do I want to have a pile of originals, or do I want to have a bunch of files that I'm worrying about they're going to get lost one day? Do you worry about that? Do you worry about like digital saving the files, or?
I worry about it while it's a live project. I don't worry about it afterwards. I don't worry about it.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, everybody has a copy somewhere on some server,
Yeah,
right? It exists now.
it exists. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't sweat it. One of my favorite things about Clip is that assets palette where you can save little bits and pieces of what you've drawn. So, like in regards to the Nico Bravo series, I have these subfolders. I have an entire library right there in Clip in a palette of like every character. Every good drawing I've done of every character who's a recurring character, bits and pieces, important background, like rooms, reuse stuff. Like it's I don't drag and drop that stuff. It becomes my pencils. So I don't have to repencil that necessarily, because it exists in there, and it's usually enough for me to bring in and re-ink. I can change the expression, I can change the pose, I can
That's
change
great.
angles and stuff like that. So it doesn't save. I don't use it in the finish. I think that's a gross kind of cross the line sort of cheating that I don't want to do. But it replaces an earlier stage, this rough kind of middle pencil stage. I can get rid of because I've got that head, I've got that figure, and you can really cover a lot of ground. And that's how I see it. It's like it recognizes the economics of making a book. Like these things have a certain range of pay, and you have to take that into consideration when you're deciding on what does it look like. These are all factors in building something that you can conceivably pull off, right? It has a certain schedule, it has a certain budget. So like the Nico Bravo style is everything I've learned about all of that put into action. It's a style that takes all that into consideration, right? And does everything it can do to help and not hinder me, right? In terms of telling this story. I tried to make a vehicle that worked with the software, that works with the deadline, that works with the budget, and doesn't break my back. That took years of mental note. Don't do that again. That thing you did in the last book, never do that again.
I love how we started talking about style and we end on style. I think that was very stylish.
We planned that.
I like it.
Yeah.
So, Mike, we're gonna put a pin in tonight. You've been a fantastic guest.
Thank you.
The chat room has been a rapt attention all night, and I don't say this to everybody, but I hope you'd consider coming back again for another episode.
I would love to. You guys are you're all legends in my mind. You're legends in reality. I've been following your work for years. So Mike's laughing, but he knows how I reacted when he initially invited me here. So I'm very grateful to all of you for indulging me. And
thanks for patience. I know we've been trying for a while to line everything up, but tonight, after the clips, everything came together.
Everything changes.
Yes. Yeah, well, thanks a lot, Micah. And it's funny that once again, the world of comics and animation is actually not that big. It's funny how many connections there are.
Oh yeah.
And it's funny, and I've said this before, I agree with you 100%. The people who worked in animation want to do comics, and the people who work in comics want to do animation. And I think that that's a great thing, because I think it really, both mediums benefit from that cross-pollination.
Absolutely.
I think for me too, learning to work in animation did the same thing. It really speeded up and actually kind of loosened up my drawing because you have to produce, hundreds of pages of storyboards.
Right.
And so you sort of learn to concentrate on what's really important, which is that evolution of you developing the style, which I think is something that something I noticed thinking more about doing graphic novels is that you really don't see as many super rendered styles. It seems like that most of the books I look at are actually simpler styles.
It's what you're saying. I mean, I think you're hitting the nail on the head. It's this mutual appreciation society, and I think one form is informing the other. And people are moving back and forth between the two, so that they're bringing that.
Yeah. And thanks for joining us. And I think there's this is one that people can go back and watch and pull a lot of kernels out of.
I love kernels. But before you go, Mike, let our viewers and listeners know, where can they find you on the web?
I would just go to, I do have a website which I update sometimes. That's just MikeCavallaro.com. And I am on Instagram, which is that's the place to go, Instagram, and that's Mike Cavallaro Art.
Gotcha. All right, thank you.
If you spell it right, you'll find me.
I like that. That should be the whole website. If you spell it right, you'll find me.net. So before we get out of here, Mike, we have a tradition. I hope you follow along with us on our way out the door. Thank you all so much for hanging out with us tonight. This was an inspired conversation. Mike, it was great getting to know you a little bit more, and keep up the great work. You're all over. I love your journey, and I think we're all kind of, like you said, we're all in our own little plane flying towards the horizon. So I'm really happy to keep up with you and hope you continue on. Guys, we're here every Wednesday at 8 p.m. unless we aren't. Join us next week. And please like, subscribe, and drop kick that alert button so you know when we have another show planned. People keep telling me, oh, I didn't know you guys were on tonight. Subscribe and you'll know. Let's fix that. Correct your actions. Guys, we're going to head out for tonight. For Mike and Steve and myself and our good guest, Mike Cavallaro, we had a great time tonight. I feel like, I just heard this. I think the cicadas are coming now. Did you hear about that?
I did. I read about it today.
The cicadas are coming. We had an earthquake in Philly a couple of days ago. I don't know. The sky's looking dark. But I would be remiss if I didn't tell you to make sure you wash your Kirby hands and then find shelter. Go find shelter.
Right. Use the Kirby hands to blast some rocks and burrow in until the cicadas are gone.
Thanks so much, guys. We'll see you next time. See you next week.